All right, peace, family. Welcome back. I know it's been a good minute, but let's get into it. I'm gonna call this one "Cotton is King." By 1860, cotton wasn't just a crop; it was a cornerstone of the global economy. And behind cotton, the unpaid torture labor of enslaved black people in America. This wasn't just genocide. This is what I call exploitive to genocide. The American South produced around 2 billion pounds of cotton per year by 1860, roughly 4 to 5 million bales annually. That accounted for two-thirds to three-quarters of the world's cotton supply. Cotton alone made up 60% of all the United States exports, bringing in 200 million annually, or around 7 to 9 billion in today's money. The global hunger for cotton fueled by the Industrial Revolution, which created a mass market for cheap, machine-made textiles. And while the South grew cotton, the North processed it in its textile mills, insured the ships, and financed plantations. Wall Street itself grew off of the cotton-backed securities and slave-backed loans. Britain, the world-leading empire at the time, depended on American cotton for 80% of its textile industry. Manchester and Lancaster were booming off of the backs of enslaved labor across the Atlantic Ocean. The British government didn't even tax raw cotton imports. They wanted it cheap to keep their empire running. Instead, they taxed the exported textiles, making massive profit off of a supply chain built on human suffering. Around a quarter of Britain's population relied on cotton for income, and yet, when the South tried to weaponize cotton during the Civil War, Britain started turning to India and Egypt, but no other cotton matched the price and the quality of U.S. cotton because no other cotton came from such a brutal and industrialized slavery. So America didn't just benefit from slavery, it was economically constructed around it. By 1860, enslaved people were worth 3 billion, the largest financial asset in the country, more than the national banks, railroads, and factories combined. The total U.S. economy was worth 4.4 billion in annual GDP. In slavery-related industry, cotton, insurance, bacon, slave trade exports made up 11 to 14% of that total economy. And in the South, enslaved people accounted for 60 to 70% of the total wealth. So it wasn't just genocide, this was exploitative genocide, a system where black bodies were used, discarded, and sacrificed to build America and British wealth from scratch. So let's go to the Confederacy. We're talking about cotton bonds. During the American Civil War, the Confederate States of America issued cotton as a desperate financial strategy to fund their rebellion. These bonds were introduced in 1863 primarily through European markets with heavy emphasis on Britain and France, nations whose textile industry were deeply reliant on Southern cotton. The Confederate promised to repay these bonds not in cash but in bales of cotton, assuming their access to the global cotton trade would ensure the bonds' value. One of the most famous was the Eglanger loan, a bond scheme brokered in Paris by Emile Erlanger and Co. It raised 15 million at the time in gold, backed by 250,000 bales of cotton. These cotton bonds were not just an economic instrument; they were a political tool. They served two purposes: to fund the South war efforts, especially since the Union blockade strangled their economy, and two, to pull Europe into the conflict by making European investors financially tied into Confederate victory. But ultimately, most cotton bonds became worthless after the Confederate defeat, but they remained a stark example of how deeply the global economy, especially in Europe, was tied to slavery and cotton production in the American South. The North wasn't separate. Northern banks financed plantations. Northern insurance, they protected slaveholders' property. New York and Boston shipped Southern cotton abroad, and Northern textile mills ran on the same blood-stained cotton as the South. Even the anti-slavery politicians was economically entangled in the very system that they claimed to oppose. Slavery was the spine of American capitalism. So, exploitative genocide is a term that I'm coining to describe what happened to our ancestors. While some was exterminated, others was used like machinery Their suffering converted directly into wealth. They were worked to death, not just killed outright. The U.S. system was built off of this, and it built two global superpowers, which is the United States and Britain. So they sacrificed our ancestors at the altar of capitalism. So we know that they owe us. But no matter if you're a Christian, the Bible says that death is better than oppression. If you're a Muslim, it says that oppression is worse than slaughter. So no matter which walk of life you walk in, you know, this is a fact. Our ancestors never got a chance to die. They had mechanisms to keep our ancestors alive, work them to death until they got every ounce out of them. People lived and died in such conditions. Whole life went to that. So it was for sure a genocide, but it was a different type of genocide because they'll play the game with it and say slaves were valuable. Okay, that don't have nothing to do with anything. Slaves were valuable, so they exploited that slave system. But genocide, according to the international definition, if you harm a group with intent, in part or in whole, that's harm, man. People lived and died as slaves. This is a Free Black Society presentation. I just wanted to show you that cotton is king. No matter how you look at it, the United States had built a global economy, not just off of what they were doing over here, but they were spreading the wealth over there to Europe and Britain, and they relied on it.